This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This episode, I'm joined by adventurer and author Alastair Humphreys to talk about his book, Unwilding, and why reconnecting with nature doesn't have to mean escaping to the wilderness. We explore everything from litter picking and climate handprints to finding wonder on your own doorstep.
I got into nature writing through adventuring. So I guess my background is from when I was a student. I got really into reading books about expeditions and explorers and people going off around the world doing crazy journeys. And that's what really inspired me when I was younger. So I did some big expeditions myself. I spent 4 years cycling around the world. I've rowed across the Atlantic Ocean in a little boat, walked across southern India, walked across the empty quarter desert, walked through Spain with no money and only a violin to earn any money, which would be great, except I cannot play the violin at all. So had this sort of big background in expeditions. And gradually over time, my expeditions have got smaller. I started doing stuff that I called micro adventures, which was trying to make adventure a bit more accessible to more people more often, trying to find short, simple, local, affordable, achievable adventures that we could squeeze in around our busy working lives. And they were things like finishing work in the evening and instead of going home to watch telly, go and sleep on a hill for a night and then rush back down the hill, back to work for 9 o'clock the next morning, sort of overnight adventures. And then since then, I've gone even smaller now to really just start exploring the very, very local. So I spent a whole year, for example, exploring the one Ordnance Survey map I live on. You know, the sort of orange maps you use if you go on a hiking trip or a geography field trip at school. I spent a whole year just exploring the 10 miles really around where I lived, which at first I thought was going to be really claustrophobic and boring because I love big adventures. But once I started really being forced to pay attention to my local area, which is a kind of boring bit of suburban southeast England, I started to notice that, hey, actually there is nature and wildness all around me. And I don't need to go across continents to find interesting nature. And from that, my curiosity began and I started belatedly to pay attention to nature. So one other thing I'll mention is that I did a zoology degree at university. And I mention that only because looking back, I was so uninterested in nature and wildness when I was at university. And it was really only by just looking at stuff close to where I live that opened up my eyes to becoming curious. So I think I'm a latecomer and a newcomer to the nature world.
I think that is a problem sometimes with us. We're so mobile nowadays that we just forget what's on our doorstep. And I think actually COVID did a lot to reawaken people's interest in their local area and their local nature. But you open the book by talking about scope neglect. I hadn't heard of that and I wondered if you could explain what that was.
Yes, so I was writing in this new book I've done about the Sycamore Gap tree, that famous, beautiful tree on Hadrian's Wall that got chopped down a few years ago, and how everyone was completely angry and outraged about that. And I was too. And I was really glad to see how angry and upset everyone was. It showed me that we do, as a nation or a society at heart, we do care about nature still. So I was kind of glad by the uproar, but I was also a bit surprised by it because it was only one tree and literally millions of trees are chopped down every single day, let's say in the Amazon rainforest, which is far more critical for nature on the whole planet scale. But we sort of feel it hard to care about that. And that got me reading about scope neglect, which essentially says that it's really hard for our brains to care more about bigger problems. So if you think how sad you get if one tree is chopped down, you don't get 100 times more sad when 100 trees are chopped down. And the good old evil dictator Joseph Stalin sums this up really well, who's of course the guy killing literally millions of people in the Soviet Union, when he said that one death is a tragedy, but a million deaths is a statistic. And I think that's a really good summary of how we engage with nature just by the small, local, little things that we know. And that's what I'm trying to argue, is that if we can start to really care about the local nature to us, then that's going to help us care about the big picture stuff too.
That's so true, I think. And once you kind of know something, you're more invested in it. So your book's called Unwilded, and one of the things you mention in it is litter. And for me, this is one of my biggest bugbears. And in fact, I have just this very morning decided to buy a litter picker, and I am determined to go on a mission around where I am. And I'm really rural, and you kind of associate littering with maybe more urban and suburban locations, but it's not. It's a countrywide problem, and you notice it, I think, when you travel to other countries, that actually all of their roadsides and all of their communal areas aren't just covered in rubbish like ours were. When I grew up, some while ago in the 80s, we had like a campaign to stop littering, and it was a really big thing. And I think maybe we did get on top of it, but now we just seem to have gone so far the other way, and there is just like rubbish everywhere. So what are your thoughts on littering? I know they're going to be negative, obviously, but also your thoughts about how we can maybe combat that and why it's important to do so.
As you were asking me there, I was thinking, wow, there are so many things to talk about for litter. So I think actually someone could start a great podcast just about litter, because it does get all of us annoyed. But equally, a lot of us are clearly dropping litter. So there's a lot of things going on. I think a few of the important things that are going on is, number one, litter is a much bigger problem than just the bits and bobs lying on your country lane. It's about our society being so accepting of just a throwaway culture that we just assume the resources of the planet are infinite, and we just make stuff, chuck it away, make stuff, chuck it away. So I think it's a much bigger systemic problem than just the individual person chucking their McDonald's out of the window. So I think we need to look at litter as a giant systemic problem. But then stepping down another layer on it, I think it really is a good example of how we're disconnected from a place and from nature. And one of the things I write about and think about a lot is we only really care for a place when we know it and when we have a connection to it and we start to feel some sort of responsibility for it. You're not going to drop litter in your own garden because you care for it. You know your garden, you care about it, but you might be a bit more inclined to chuck it out the window because you don't really care about somewhere. So I think the people dropping litter are not evil people. I think they're just disconnected from nature. So I think it's important to ask, why are we disconnected from nature and how can we help fix that? Then the next thing I'll say about litter is how my response to it has changed. So like you, it would get me really cross and really annoyed, and I start ranting and grumbling away. But what I've tried to do, rather than getting just grumpy by the problems, is to try and cheer myself up with some solutions. So like you, I've got a litter picker now, and I find it really satisfying when I'm out to try and fill a bag full of litter. And I'm endlessly competitive in everything I do. So I find it quite a satisfying game to like fill a whole bag of litter. So now, rather than just feeling cross, I actually feel quite cheerful that I'm making a tiny, tiny, tiny little improvement to a place. I will stop now talking about litter because we could go on for about an hour for a bit, couldn't we? There are a lot of issues involved.
Yeah, there are. And again, just you saying that has kind of made me rethink my thoughts on it, because I think litter, yes, a podcast, somebody do a podcast about litter, and it's not just the visible litter because everybody's littering. It's a difference about where it ends up. Some of it's on a roadside and some of it's diligently taken to a recycling centre, and then probably nothing happens with it in terms of recycling. So yeah, that's definitely a conversation that's bigger than this podcast episode. So you talk about travel as well, and can you tell me what you mean by that?
So I was talking about the importance I feel of trying to reduce our tendency to think, I need a break, I'll jump on an aeroplane and fly off to somewhere around the planet, which of course is really harmful for the environment, and trying to get myself into more of a mindset of exploring locally and discovering things locally, as most of the planet still does and as everyone did for thousands of years. And I feel that one of the reasons sometimes you might be tempted to go on a holiday is because you get so fed up with where you live, there's litter all down the lanes, and you just think, oh, I can't take this anymore. I'm going to jump on an aeroplane to the Galapagos Islands and go and look at some nature there. And I think that sort of escaping from places rather than having a deeper connection and repairing a place, that's what I was reflecting about there.
I got from it as well, this tendency for us to want to escape into the wild and go maybe move somewhere that's more wild, less people, less kind of damage, without actually thinking about how we can repair where we are and make it a better place to live, which I thought was a very sound point to make. I think probably a lot of us crave it in our heart. Oh, if I could just go and live in a cabin in the woods, I'd be happy. But actually, it's not that, is it?
Yes, well, that was exactly one of the reasons why I began my project of spending a whole year exploring the map I live on, is because I don't really like where I live. I'd much rather live in a cabin in the mountains than in somewhere where I can hear a motorway and everyone just goes to the shopping centre at the weekends. But I don't really like having that attitude about my life. So I decided I wanted to try and get a more positive approach to it by trying to look for more nearby nature and wildness. And one thing that's really surprised me in the last few years since I really started paying attention to nature was that I grew up in the countryside, a nice of rural childhood, and I've always had this assumption that the lovely green English countryside is perfect nature. But as you and your listeners will know, we're one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, and our beautiful green countryside is actually kind of a green desert. There's often not much wildness and nature there. And what I discovered exploring my local area is that by being more open-minded about what wildness is and what nature is, you start to find more of it. So, for example, if you go around the back of your local Tesco's or around some broken down industrial units that have been abandoned, you start to go there. And if you explore there with curiosity, you find nature sprouting up through the broken tarmac. There's all the buddleia bushes, loads of butterflies, lots of foxes wandering around. It feels to me much wilder than some of the so-called green and pleasant land that I was assuming was the perfect nature.
Yeah, that is so true. There's a lot of kind of patchwork habitats that spring up where there's been disturbance, and, you know, that's been noted to be good for biodiversity. And also, I think you talking about the local area and this idea that we need to escape into the wild, but actually it's not that wild when you examine it. And you have this kind of nature connection that you're craving. And sometimes that can manifest as like this sense of overwhelm. It's like, oh, I can't change where I am. But another really important point that you make is that nature connection doesn't arrive through grand gestures, but by small actions repeated often. And I think we sometimes forget that, don't we? That we can make a difference, but it might not be on the grand scale that we envisage it.
Yeah, exactly. Begin today with what you have, where you happen to be right now. That's all any of us can do, rather than just thinking, oh, I'll wait until I'm a billionaire and then I'll fix it. Or, oh, if only I was a really important person, I would fix it all. All any of us can do is what we have right in front of us right now. And I think that's important to do in order to try and fix places. But also, I'm a really selfish person. The only reason I really care about nature and fixing it is because I really like it. It makes my days more enjoyable and pleasant and richer and more beautiful. So I really like nature because it's just good for me, which is quite selfish of me, but hopefully that doesn't matter because it's still making stuff better for everyone and for the whole natural world. So starting to notice nature is the first step towards caring about it, and caring about it is the first step towards taking a tiny little bit of local action, and a tiny bit of local action is the first step towards doing bigger and more meaningful stuff. So yeah, I just think start with wherever you are right now. And nature is everywhere for all of us. Even if you live in the middle of the biggest city, hopefully you can see a tree from your window. And if you notice that tree, so I took a photograph of a tree every week for a year. And when I first started doing the first week, it's like click photo, not very interesting. Next week, looks the same, click photo, not very interesting. 2 months later, however, the leaves started to go golden. I'm like, oh, wow, it's changing. And you start to notice and care for that single tree, even if you're just in the middle of a city.
Yeah, you absolutely do. You have to stop and take the time, which is a battle in itself, isn't it? That making time for nature is a tricky thing.
It is a tricky thing, but for those of us who feel that we don't have time for nature, I think we need it even more. If you don't have time for 15 minutes in nature, then you probably need 30 minutes in nature to find some sort of way to slow down a little bit.
And your book is very sort of instructional, and I don't want you to give too much away because people need to obviously read it. But you talk about your 5 battles. Are you happy to kind of go into briefly what that involves?
Yeah, very much. Then we can save everyone the bother of having to actually read it. So like a lot of people who care about nature, I started to get overwhelmed by all the bad stuff. The Amazons are being chopped down, the polar bears are all dying, there's litter on my street. So much, and you can get really down and depressed, can't you? So I read about this little trick online. It's called the 5-25 rule. And what you do is, well, they suggest you write down 25 bad things. I decided to write down every single bad thing in the entire world. Polar bears, Amazon rainforest, litter on my street. And you can imagine this becomes an enormous list. And then what I started to do was I just crossed off everything that I had no control over. The example I give is the cement industry is an enormous emitter of greenhouse gases. I can't fix the cement industry. So rather than me getting sad about it and carrying this burden around at me, I just had to let it go. And then I started to look at things on the list that I could actually have some sort of impact on through, my skills and my connections and blah, blah, blah. And gradually this giant list of global problems, I managed to shrink down into 5 things that I really cared about, that I could actually have some sort of impact on. And that felt like a really lightening of my soul. But then the next step, though, is that these are still 5 problems that are grinding you down in your head. So I tried to flip those problems around by then looking at every single possible solution I could think of for these 5 problems. Loads and loads of things I could do, invest £1 billion in this sort of thing, or go pick up some litter on my street. And then I went through this list trying to find 5 things that actually were realistic and achievable, and that me, with my skills and who I am and where I live, could actually have an influence on. And so rather than having every problem in the world making me sad and depressed and angry and resentful, what I have now is just 5 positive actions that I can be getting on with, which selfishly I quite enjoy, and which hopefully make a tiny little step towards making things better locally and therefore for the planet as well.
And the other sort of positive spin that you put on it is, obviously we're probably all beating ourselves up about our climate footprint, but you talk about a climate handprint. And I thought that was a very, very positive way to look at it and to kind of help you feel better in the face of mounting problems.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that the idea of a climate handprint isn't more famous, because I admit it was new to me when I was researching this book. We all know, of course, about our climate footprint. We feel guilty every time we have a cheeseburger and every time we go on an aeroplane. This is our footprint, our footprint, our footprint. It's us ruining the universe. The climate handprint is much more positive. That is, what things are you doing to make a place better? And what's really exciting, I think, about a climate handprint, not only is it more positive and makes you feel better about life, it can be enormous. I could jump on an aeroplane every day this year. That would be a bad footprint. But just imagine if I persuaded every president on the planet to solve climate change. Then my footprint would be so worth it because of my much bigger handprint. So the handprint is a really positive thing that can be absolutely enormous. And this is the good that we do for nature and the planet. So yes, I think it's important to pay attention to our footprint, but the handprint is really positive and can be much bigger. And to be honest, it's a much more cheerful thing to talk to your friends and colleagues and people in the pub about, people who get sick of you ranting about nature and stuff like that. It's a positive, cheerful solution.
Yeah. And I mean, it might be just as simple as telling people what you're up to. It doesn't need to be anything that's directly influencing people, in terms of maybe, let's go back to litter, for an example. You don't have to rally 6 of your neighbours to go and do a litter pick. You might just say to your neighbour, oh, I'm doing this litter pick because of these reasons. And just that communication is part of your climate handprint, and that's a positive thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think communication is so important in this. 2 aspects of it. One is to focus on the positive sides of communication. So when you're talking to your neighbour, don't just grumble away about the litter on your street. Tell them how much you're enjoying getting your daily steps in and how satisfying it feels to have made the place nicer. It's a positive conversation you're having. And also, I think it's really important that each of us do not underestimate how powerful we are. I'm not a prime minister, so I can't talk to a million people, but I can talk to some people. We're all part of communities, the people you meet at the school gate, or the people you meet at the office, or in your church or your football team. And also, it's important to realize that each of us can connect with different sorts of people. So the sort of people who I hang out with, who might listen to me, are different to the sort of people you hang out with, who might listen to you, or the sort of people your granny hangs out with and listen to her. So we can all have a lot more power on people like us than we realize. And I think, again, that becomes positive because it makes us realize I do have agency. I can make a positive difference. I don't just need to get ground down by the bad news on the TV.
Yeah, exactly. You seem to be the sort of person who makes a lot of connections, and you've got obviously a very curious mind, and you put in some brilliant websites in the book. I mean, how on earth do you come across these things? Do you just kind of like follow a thread?
So whenever I start to write a book, I think, this book's a really good idea because it'll be really quick and easy and won't take me very long. And then I just start reading stuff. I read books that leads me off to other books. I read so many books or go down rabbit holes on the internet. And then I end up with these ridiculously gigantic, bloated books that are so enormous and I have to just delete vast amounts of it to try and make it manageable. So yeah, I think it's just opening your eyes to curiosity. And what was also good about this book is that I had no pretense to myself that I was an expert. I knew from the start, I'm new to this kind of stuff. I don't really know very much, and therefore I just need to listen and learn from other people. So I think of being a curious, enthusiastic, and being positive about being a beginner. I'm quite enjoying saying, I've got no idea about the difference between a sedge warbler and a reed warbler, but kind of interested to find out. So yeah, being an enthusiastic novice is my approach.
Yeah, I think we should all approach things with an attitude that we have got loads more to learn. I think that's useful to anybody and everybody. So obviously you are one of those people who's always on a mission of some sort or another and always up to something. What are your plans? Are you allowed to share them? What have you got planned for the future?
Well, for the first time in a very long time, I actually have no plans. I've absolutely no idea. I really enjoy writing books, but to be honest, society's not reading many books in general, but nobody reads my books. My books sell incredibly badly, and I've never really minded that because I've been passionate about it, but it has started to grind me down to the point where I think, right, I think it's time for a new project that doesn't involve writing books. I really like writing newsletters and trying to communicate with people through that sort of stuff, but right now I have absolutely no idea what to do next. I think I'm having a full-on midlife crisis.
Oh, I mean, dare I suggest a podcast about littering?
I'm actually writing that down right now, litter podcast, because yeah, everyone has opinions on it.
Thanks to Alastair for sharing his thoughts and reminding us that meaningful change often starts much closer to home than we think. If you enjoyed today's episode, you might also like episode 370, Remembering Our Nature, and episode 373, Unwilding. You'll find links to both in the show notes, and as always, thank you for listening. Next up is Benny with his Insect of the Week.
The Weld bee. Scientific name, Hylaeus signatus. So my insect of the week this week is an incredible bee of the Hylaeus genus. These bees are kind of known as yellow-faced bees, or masked bees. And they're an incredible group. Quite small, quite hard to ID, but this one I've chosen is one of the largest species of this group. Start quickly with the etymology. Hylaeus means, from ancient Greek, of the wood or the forest. So Hylaeus, that's the translation. And I'm assuming it would be the edge of woodland really because it would need sun and the heat. But their cavity nest is often in small cavities, potentially created by beetles or weevils. And the one today is almost exclusively associated with Rosada species. So that is Weld and mignonette. So two beautiful wild native plants. And the females only collect pollen from those two, as far as we understand it. And really interestingly, the pollen collection method is pretty mad. So obviously you've seen a lot of bees with pollen on their legs or some on their bellies. This is a unique pollen collection method whereby the female eats the pollen and nectar and she carries it internally in their crop, which is a pouch in the stomach. And then she'll spit it out, regurgitate it when she reaches her nest burrow. So some people have managed to get photographs of them and regurgitating it. It looks like a bubble. Really cool if you look up a picture of that. Very fascinating group. This was the first bee that a Swedish biologist showed me the males, and he said, smell it. He held one, and I was holding it, and he said, smell it, and it smelled of lemon. The first time I found out that some male bees smell of lemon, that was another mind-blowing moment. That was at Peter Korn's garden last year. So Hylaeus signatus, some people call it the large yellow-faced bee. I tend to call it the Weld bee because it's so closely tied to it. So Weld and mignonette, another reason to grow these wonderful wild plants. And yeah, I've had it recorded in the Eden Garden in London this year for the first time on the Weld, as you guessed it. And very happy to see it and record it. I will share a picture of it. So please do keep an eye on your Weld and mignonette. Quite tricky bees to ID, so you'll need a very close inspection of it. And there's a lot of very close species, but hopefully you'll get to see one. As always, please do record on the apps iRecord and iNaturalist. Get the best photography you can. And I really, really hope you see one.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.